My name is Randy Frank. I was born and raised in Fairbanks. I'm 77 years old, and I worked on the Alaska pipeline project, although it was the Yukon Bridge that I was involved in. So I wrote a little bit about my memories in this area and how I thought about the whole process of building the Yukon Bridge, which was a pretty important part of the haul road going north. So building the Yukon River Bridge, Manson Osberg Construction Company was the contractor. GHEM Company, it's an acronym for the original owners, Garrity, Hefflinger, Erickson, Mitchell, Marlin, and Marlin. Carl Hefflinger left and Comrade Frank joined in 1959, and they kept the name. They couldn't figure out how to get a F in there, in that name. The E.L. Patton River Bridge, Yukon River Bridge project was part of the Trans-Alaska Pipeline Project, but it was actually an Alaska State Highways hard money job like the state would normally put out, asking for bidders on all roads and bridges. Contractors submitted cost projections using the state's engineering specifications for a large 2,295-foot long bridge spanning the Yukon River from a high bluff on the north side to a low flat plain on the south side, to the north side, which was a low flat plain. The bridge was designed to carry two large diameter pipelines as well as to provide a year-round crossing of the Yukon River for heavy trucks hauling materials north to the oil fields. The building of the TAPS line and the year-round haul road north, later to be named the Dalton Highways, was a cost plus get the job done as fast as you can project. The oil companies wanted it done. Cost was not an object. But the construction companies bidding on the Yukon River job had to give the state of Alaska an accurate dollar figure to complete the bridge on time. Hopefully they figured out a profit in the construction process while being the lowest qualified bidder. The partnership of Manson Osberg GHEM Company, MOG, won the contract and started preparatory work on the project in March of 1974. My father, Conrad Frank, one of the GHEM Company owners and the chief engineer, worked with engineers at the much larger Seattle-based Manson Osberg companies to come up with a bid that the state of Alaska accepted. Manson and Osberg companies were experienced bridge and dock work contractors. Manson and Osberg and GHEM Company had partnered on other bridge projects in the past and had the bonding, the insurance capabilities needed for such a large job. GHEM Company had remote bush-type Alaskan construction experience and was a well-known interior-based Alaskan-owned bridge and building contractor who had a good working history with the state of Alaska and could gear up fairly quickly using their equipment located in Fairbanks. At the start of the construction in March of 1974, GHEM Company ran the job with Jack Cook as the project supervisor, the original manager on the job. Later in the year, many longtime construction employees of Manson Osberg joined the crew, and one of their supervisors took over as the project supervisor. Many longtime GHEM Company employees had work that early spring, which was a good economic boost. Greg Mitchell, Harvey Marlin III, Randy and Steve Frank, four sons of GHEM Company owners, were among those who initially started their preparatory work in minus 30 to 40 degree temperatures on the north and south banks of the Yukon River. The Trans-Alaska Pipeline Project, as well as MOG, used a winter ice bridge that was built up by pumping river water on top of the existing river ice. It quickly froze in successive layers, thus creating a much thicker section of ice. This crossing was very close to the Yukon Bridge site, and allowed transportation across the river like in prior years for all the heavy cargo loads going north. In the summer months, a barge ferry system allowed cross-river traffic. The first workers for GHEM Company, MOG, in March of '74 stayed at the Alaska camp 5 miles north of the river and were transported to and from the construction site. We soon constructed our own camp and shop and began the process of extracting gravel and sand from the riverbanks while the river was low and stockpiling it on the north side of the river for making concrete. Next, a large forced air inflated tube supported building, a beluga building, was set up and heated to house the year-round concrete batch plant, gravel, sand, and cement storage facility. During my 2 winters of working on the bridge project in 1974 and '75, I was a heavy equipment operator running D8 cats, cat front-end loaders, a hydraulic crane, and the second year as a batch plant operator on the night shift during our very long concrete pours. Something very different from the MOG employees from the pipeline construction company's employees was that there were no women at our camp, and we were allowed to have alcohol in our rooms. Also, there were no 798 pipeline welders on the job to demand all sorts of benefits. I do not remember any MOG employee being fired for being inebriated on the job or belligerently drunk in the mess hall. One night at the mess hall, one of the employees started talking about a plan that he had for the next Sunday. He wanted to streak naked across the frozen Yukon River, and he wanted a bunch of us to witness it. So about 10 of us went down to the river that day and watched him do it. It was about 0 degrees, and one of us drove him to the south side of the river and dropped him off. He did streak naked across the river ice with only his work boots on, and it was very easy to see him because he was black guy and everything else was white. Alaska employees were not supposed to have any alcohol in their camps, and even though there was a guard shack, a checkpoint on the South River bank, booze was snuck into those camps. One night, an old high school friend came down from 5 Mile Camp and asked if we could help all of the Alaska employees there. The word was out that security was going to do a room-by-room alcohol inspection. So Greg Mitchell and I used Greg's pickup that he had driven up to our job to load up the whole pickup bed with beer and hard liquor. We drove Greg's pickup to Fairbanks that night, unloaded the booze, and stored it in his garage. We got a few hours sleep and drove back to the bridge job in time to start work. A couple of weeks later, we went back to Fairbanks, loaded up all the booze, and returned it to the 5 Mile Camp employees. None of those Alaska employees lost their jobs, and Greg and I were richly rewarded with some of the beer and hard liquor. At the beginning of this paper, I said that the contractors used the state's engineering specifications to figure out a way to build the bridge. Well, those state specs included river bottom drill logs to use for engineering purposes when figuring out the amount of material to excavate from the inside the locking sheet steel pile cofferdams, so the bottom of the mid-river bridge piers could be anchored to bedrock with large steel piling and an amazing amount of concrete. The state didn't drill enough holes to the bedrock on the southernmost pier support river bottom area and missed a fault in the bedrock. Thus, a large area of the bedrock was much lower than the rest of the area needed for the expanded rock base. That mistake caused much extra work and greatly increased the amount of needed reinforcing steel and concrete for the base of that southern pier, forcing about $1 million cost-plus addition to the bridge contract. The bridge was completed on time and opened for traffic on October 10th, 1975. Thank you. Well, I'm really proud of it, it changed a lot of people's lives here. It opened up the idea that yes, construction can be done in the wintertime as long as it's done with specific ideas in mind about how to do it. And one thing that always bothered me, my brother and I talked about this a lot, say, so what if you were a recent high school graduate and a job on the pipeline was your first experience working construction? My brother and I thought you were probably ruined for the rest of your life about how construction camps really worked, because it was a false idea about a money cost project that didn't normally exist in any other kind of construction jobs in the state of Alaska. Well, I talked about a heated batch plant that we used, and that made it possible to pour concrete 24 hours a day all winter long. It was pretty simple operation. We used this air-supported building and kept it heated, and it was perfect. We kept gravel and sand and the concrete making materials of cement in that building. And we operated sometimes, maybe not 24 hours a day, but close to it, because we had many thousands of cubic yard pours to make in those concrete piers. I think it's a lot different now. Maybe people don't want that kind of a job, but I always felt lucky to have grown up in that kind of a experience with construction jobs. It allowed me to raise my family, make good money while I was working on site, and I sort of got out of the working away from home business later on in life and got into gold mining, where I could drive to and from the gold mine easily, and so could my wife with our kids. And that was important to me. Having grown up since I was 15 years old working in bush construction jobs, I would witness lots of married guys' lives fall apart because they were gone 5-6 months out of the year, and home the rest of the time doing not much, just sitting around, and it sort of ruined their marriages. And I swore I was never going to do that myself. Very cold. Like I said, it was minus 40 to 50 degrees below zero when we started, and there was often a wind blowing along the river, which made it even worse. And so you had to prepare to work outside in that kind of weather. Luckily, as cat operators could use old-time cat operators' technique of putting tarps along the side of the engines and reversing the fan so it blew warm air back on the operator, and you could operate the cat at 50 below weather and be nice and warm. As long as you work the cat hard, which we were doing quite easily most of the time. The gravel was frozen, and we had to rip it up first, and then stack it up in piles, and then transport it up to where we were going to have the batch plant set up. Well, I think the most significant achievement was building that bridge. That was it's the only bridge across the Yukon River in the United States, and it's quite a feat, I think. The original cost was $31 million, and I didn't mention any dollar figures in my little story here, because I think it's hard to relate to dollar figures 50 years ago. We just don't understand it, I don't think, nowadays, unless you lived it, in the past. But that was I think one of my crowning achievements, I would say, in my construction life. I didn't have any disappointments. I was happy. I was just happy to be working in the wintertime, which I had not been able to do in the past. And I had just become involved with a woman, and we got married in December of '75. And I had quite a bank account built up after working those 2 winters, and it really helped. No, not really. It was, we worked, we worked hard. We didn't mess around. We knew, the company had to make money on this job, and that was a prerequisite. And it was instilled in all of us workers, that was necessary, that we keep our heads about us and did our work well enough to make things work correctly. Oh, yeah. The hydrofoil, I wasn't around that much. I didn't, I usually left in May, and then I would come back usually probably about November or so, December even, to start work. And so I wasn't around it much, but it was a pretty simple little system. It was a hydrofoil barge, that they would run back and forth across the river. But it missed out on about a month there on each end of a season when it was operated. So that held up materials going north.